welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us here today for RealAg Live. Today we're going to have some fun discussions about research, changing demographics on the farm, and how all of that really impacts decision making. If you want to participate in today's show, all you have to do is enter your comment or your question in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. Your participation is what makes this show unique and different than anything else that is out there. We are, of course, live, which is in the name RealAg Live, just in case that was missed on anyone. Let's bring in today's guest, a good friend of mine. It is Justin Funk of AgriStudies, based out of Guelph, Ontario. Justin, how are you?
I'm well, Shaun. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Doing great. It is the TV is totally taken over by the inauguration in the U.S. So we're going to take a bit of a break from that, and we're going to talk about agriculture here, like we absolutely should be. Hey, Justin, give some background on yourself and what AgriStudies is and some of the work that you do to kind of give a bit of a context to the audience.
Sure. AgriStudies is a marketing services firm based out of Guelph, Ontario. I'm the managing partner, and it's a family business started by my father, Tom, in 1980. And what we primarily do is market research, focusing on understanding farmers' attitudes, behaviors, preferences, things of that nature. And I also spend a lot of time in the classroom teaching. I teach sales and marketing to people in the agribusiness sector. And I've been doing that now for about the past 19 years.
Okay. So from some of the work that you've been doing at AgriStudies, when we talk about defining like young farmer, how do you do that? Like, is that, I know there's some groups that say like under 40 you're young. In other industries, 40 would be like a transitional period, and you're kind of thinking about retire. You're at least you're looking at the end in terms of retirement. How do you define a young farmer?
Well, of course, there's the age demographic. You look at the year somebody was born, and that's, I guess, very subjective. As I seem to be moving now into the next age bracket, I look at age not necessarily as a number, but as an attitude, which is something else that we look at as well. One of the things that I've been paying close attention to lately is looking at where somebody is in their farming career. So, regardless of how old they are they just getting started? Are they expanding, maintaining? And there's usually a correlation there between age and where I am in my career, but it's not as closely defined as it would be by simply looking at um, how old somebody is. The other thing that we tend to look at is what generation are they on the farm? So, as you know, many farms in Canada, in North America, are multi generational farms. And so we pay attention to whether somebody is the older, the middle, or the younger generation on the farm. And that helps us also define the younger farmer, if you will.
So who's making the decisions? When you kind of look at some of the data, what does it tell you in terms of who's making the decisions? Are we seeing more young people making decisions on the farm, or is that still left to more of the senior side of the farming team?
That really depends on what decision is being made. We find that the lower risk the decision, the more likely it is that a younger person on the farm will be making or involved in that particular decision. For instance, a decision for seed or chemicals or fertilizer. Uh, in a study that I did back in 2016 with my colleagues at Purdue University, we measured the decision making dynamics on multi generational farms. And one of the things we learned in that study is that there's a bit of a transition that takes place. The younger generation is given more and more purchase responsibility as time goes on. And in many cases, it begins with seed. Seed tends to be the first category of purchase decision making given to that younger generation on the farm. And then from there, I suppose you could say they earn more and start to make bigger decisions. And so right now, what we're seeing is a transition more to uh, the bigger ticket, more expensive, longer term type purchases like equipment and things like that. Uh, when it comes to things like making marketing decisions or major financial decisions, those types of decisions tend to be more reserved for the older generation on the farm. But one thing that we're monitoring is, as time goes on, how that starts to change, and we are starting to see a shift in that direction as the older generation or more mature generation, if you will, phases out, and the younger generation earns that more responsibility.
It's interesting that seed is one of those first things that is given up as as a decision that needs to be made. And yeah, you know what, young whippersnipper, you go look after seed purchases, like, because that's a pretty important. Like, it may be not like the same size of purchase of like a combine or something, or maybe should we buy that piece of land? It's still an important purchase. It, like, everything starts with the seed. Why do you think that's something that's passed off so early?
I had that very same question, and so in this study, we followed it up with a qualitative set of interviews where we would ask questions like, "Why do you feel this way?" And the the answer to that question, quite simply, was, and I'm paraphrasing here, because you can't mess it up. The idea is that a lot of, and I don't mean to say something that I shouldn't, especially to my friends in the seed business, but a lot of products are really good products, and there's not a tremendous amount of differentiation between products. And in many cases, a farm is planting multiple varieties of seed. So, you can spread that risk around. Um, and I think something else that I should say is that in many cases, that decision is made in consultation with a seed dealer or a retailer or an agronomist who's helping
Yeah,
make the right choice.
it's a good
So
point. There's
all
some
those
hand
things,
holding.
right? And so there's a level of reduced risk associated
Okay.
with seed. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's such an important decision in the context of a growing season. If you do screw it up at the beginning of the year, well, that's going to have implications down the road. So, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But
Yeah.
it was interesting to see how that works. And incidentally, if it's not seed, it's crop protection. If it's not crop protection, it's fertilizer.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. I know when our family was farming, that was one of the very first things that was passed off to me when I got back from university is, okay, you decide what we're going to spray. Okay, I guess I get out the book and we'll make some decisions. How about that? Now, we've seen lots of consolidation on the corporate side of agriculture, but we're also seeing consolidation at the farm level. What impact does that have on the farming landscape as you see it?
Well, I have to say that I think farm consolidation historically has probably been one of the biggest drivers behind everything that's happened in ag. I believe it starts on the farm, and farm consolidation. Let's not misinterpret this. It's not new. It's been happening since the beginning of time. It's just now it seems like a bigger deal because instead of going from a 100-acre farm to a 200-acre farm, you're going from a 20,000 acre farm to a 200,000 acre farm in some cases. So, the order of magnitude is much more significant. But it is having impacts. I think one of the impacts is that, well, first of all, it's creating more competition at the retailer level and with manufacturers. There's fewer farmers. I mean, I think that's the thing that we got to look at is that, roughly the same number of acres, same number of animals are being grown, but there's fewer people making decisions. But with that being said, on these larger businesses, you see more people now involved in the decision making, and that adds complexity to the whole thing. So that's one of the observations that we've made in terms of farm consolidation. It's when you look at what's been going on with farm consolidation too, we follow where people are in their farm career. So one of the markers there is I'm in the expansion mode, and we've seen over the past 10 years fewer people indicating that they're in expansion mode, which is not a bad thing. Especially when you look at it from the standpoint of those getting out. You ask yourself, where's growth going to come from? And there have been issues with farm growth over the years. And in some of the more recent research we've done, we've seen that the attitude towards the farmer is now, well, I'm going to focus less on growth and a little bit more on increasing efficiencies on the
Right.
farm. And that has had, I believe, some significant implications when it comes to the proliferation and adoption of new technology.
It's like that idea of, instead of buying more land, I'm going to fix up the land that I already own, and I can gain some more acres and more production out of the land we're already, making payments on, or we've got interest costs on as well. Hey, got a question here from Lindsay. Should or does ownership go along with capital decisions?
Well, should and does might be two different things. I think it totally depends on the dynamics of the business. Um, I think what we generally find is the more stake somebody has in the business, the more say they're going to have in maybe not what is being purchased, but if something's going to be purchased. So, you take a look at any business, there are these dynamics that exist and different roles that are being played. And one of those roles is the person that approves a purchase, and another could be somebody who decides on what that purchase is going to be.
Mm.
So I think that traditionally what we see is that the more ownership that I have, the more skin in the game, so to speak, the more say I have in saying you can buy something, and here's the budget to do it. Uh, Alongside that, then there might be somebody else who's now going to work on the specifics, who has certain criteria that they're looking for, whether it be from a usability or operational standpoint, that will decide, okay, what specific products and features, what brand are we going to look at, who are we going to buy it from, etc. So
Yeah.
that seems to be how things are working, and it would make sense that it works that way.
Uh,
I think what we
go ahead.
find is
Yep.
often the less somebody gets involved in the day-to-day operational kind of stuff, the more they remove themselves from the specifics of, okay, I want this, that, and the other thing in this particular product that I'm buying.
Question here from Kara goes back to who's making the decisions. At what point does that older generation stop making the decisions and pass down to the middle and younger generation? You've kind of alluded to that already, where it depends on probably what that decision is, right?
Mm-hmm. It does. It depends on what the decision is. And, when we look at the lower risk purchases being made earlier in the career, it's almost seems as if there's an order by which you earn that responsibility. And so I think the answer to that question, I don't think it's a particular age or after a particular number of years. I just think it's when there is enough trust in that person that they're going to make a good decision. It could be after a year, it could be after 10 years. I mean, honestly, in some of the work that I've done, I've spoken to farmers who are, in their 50s and are frustrated because they still haven't earned that right, or been given that right to make some of the decisions on the farm. And
Yeah.
that creates then a whole bunch of other issues related to family dynamics and conflict.
Phil brings up a good question here, and it's something I'm really interested in. And he asks, how much can farmers make by bargaining with their suppliers? When I saw this question, I actually thought of how different generations view their suppliers. And is that a relationship of, loyalty, trust? There's all these qualitative measures that go with it, service, timeliness of delivery, all those kinds of things, versus like the transaction. Can you separate some of those things generationally at all, or not?
Well, we definitely know that there are differences in how the different generations view purchasing. Uh, in the last 50 years, we've seen this shift from it being much more of a friendly relationship to more of a business relationship. Um, when you take a look at certain criteria that is being used, uh, one thing that we've observed is that the younger generation, although they might appear to be more price focused, uh, are to a degree, but not at the expense of convenience and value added services that come from the supplier. So, it all really depends on the individual. And it's one of those things that we find is very difficult to tie back to demographics. Although I will say that in a lot of the situations that I'm working with in terms of clients, salespeople in particular, price cost often seems to be elevated to the top of the list of challenges that they have, because it's often one of those first things that's brought up. So, I look at Phil's question, and hi, Phil, by the way, it's good to hear from you. Phil is a former student of my father at the university, and I've known Phil for a long time. Uh, how much can they make by bargaining with their suppliers? Well, it depends on the supplier and what you're getting and how much the supplier is willing to give up on both the price and on the services and value added side of things. Um, Negotiation skills has never been one of my strong suits, but I do know this, that if you are going to ask to get something, you should be prepared to give something up um,
Yeah.
in the process.
I want to, Phil does a follow up here. In earlier studies at the University of Guelph, farmers made about 8%. Can people do better than that? I think that's probably, like you just said, that probably depends on what the product is as well.
Yeah. It does. And, I think one thing that we all have to look at is that when we're buying something, we're not just buying a bag of seed, we're not just buying a jug of chemical or a ton of fertilizer. There's more that goes into that package. And some people are going to value different elements of that package more than others. And that's where a good supplier can, take some time to get to know who their customer is and what's important to them and make sure they put together the right package in the first place. And then bargaining shouldn't need to be an issue because the
Yeah.
value's there.
I should mention that Real Agriculture and AgriStudies have been doing some work cooperatively. We call it Real AgriStudies. It's pretty creative naming there. We've been doing a farm vision study. Justin, do you want to hit on that really, really quick before we move on to some more questions? Kind of what the idea was?
The idea was to take a snapshot of how today's farmer thinks and feels when it comes to decision making, trying to measure attitudes and preferences. And, by looking at that relative to behaviors and demographics, we can start to better understand who the farmer is, what's important to them, how they go about making decisions in effort to better understand them better. And so we were met with great success with that. We had over 800 farmers voluntarily complete this survey. And, I honestly like to look at it, these people offered their insights to us. And, I think we owe it to them to listen so we can serve them better at the end of the day. Now, this project is a redux of a project that was done in 2010 called the Commercial Producer Study, which was a redux of the 1995 study that was done at the University of Guelph. So this project has some history. And what that allows us to do is not just take a look at the snapshot of how things are today, but to compare how have they changed over time.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff has changed. Absolutely. Just agriculture is it is a fast changing industry. If anybody wants more information on that Real Agri Studies project, reach out to Justin or myself, and we'd love to chat with you about it. Justin, what about the attitude of the farmer towards the industry? And how they view it, because like we hear a lot about how agriculture is a lifestyle. No, you shouldn't think it like that. Agriculture is a business. You need to think about it like that. And then probably the reality is a lot of people think about it both lifestyle and business. What is some of your research indicating in terms of the attitude towards farming?
Well, in our most recent study, we observed that there is a group of farmers who look at farming as a way of life. And there's a group that looks at it as a business. And then there's this other group that looks at it as equally a business or way of life. And this is something we've been monitoring over the past 25 years. And what's interesting, when you go back to 2010, when we did our last study, the needle had not moved. About a quarter of the farmers felt that farming was a business and just a business, which I think is an important attitude to look at and explore, because what goes into that is certain behaviors. So if I look at something as being a business and just a business, when I'm making a decision, I'm likely going to look at things from a very rational point of view. Uh, about 8% of farmers said that, no, I look at farming as a way of life and just a way of life. And that's important too, because, I think you can infer from that the criteria I'll use to make a decision would be more on the emotional side, perhaps. And what do I mean by that? I mean, rational ROI, efficiencies, managing labor, things like that. You look at the emotional side. Is it good for the community? Is it good for the land? Is it good, for my family? That kind of stuff. But about 66% said it's equally a business and way of life, which makes me believe that both sets of criteria are going to be evaluated in decision making. As farms get bigger, there is often this thought that they become more business oriented. And in our latest study, we proved that not to be true. In fact, there are fewer farmers today that say they look at farming just as a business. There's no more that said it's just a way of life, but that group in the middle has increased significantly. And what's interesting is combined with that, we have also seen when we attempt to measure things like farmer goals, we see a increase in the overall importance of personal goals, like passing the farm down to the next generation, being more involved in the community, having a good place to raise a family, having more free time. So I think that there's something there that's connected, and that helps us identify, really who is the farmer, not just on the farm, but in their personal life as well. And I think, Shaun, you can appreciate this. I know I can. In order for me to have a good personal life, a lot of that is contingent on how I succeed in business, and so that connection exists as well. And so, for suppliers, that's something that they need to be attuned to.
Audience member pointed or asked for how we find out more about Real AgriStudies. Go to realagriculture.com/agristudy. Sorry, I'll start over. Go to realagriculture.com/realagristudies. So, question here from Gerard. Just give me a second. Going to put it up. More of a comment, I think. Service should always be first up to a certain point. Then it should be price second. No cheaper price is any good if service to get the product doesn't show up on time. Younger generation will have to learn that. Comment from Gerard watching on Facebook.
Yeah, Gerard, that's an interesting point. And that's an example of how different farmers think differently from one another. There are some farmers that totally believe that service or relationship or convenience have to be number one and then price is a second. There's another group out there that says, no, price is first because I've got the service aspect looked after because I've got a independent agronomist who's working for me. So we need to pay attention to those differences, and that's one of the things we explore by looking at answers to different questions put together to paint this picture or profile of different types of farmers. But your comment about the younger generation, I think, is a really interesting one. Often we're critical of the younger generation for being less loyal, more price sensitive, more transactional. One thing we need to consider is their field of experience, their frame of reference. If you're looking at the under 35 farmer, who, by the way, their average age is about 31 years old. They grew up in an age where they could go online from a very young age. And they could research things on their own independently. They are used to buying things online, and what comes with that is instant gratification. I don't have to wait to make a decision. So I can't be critical of that at all. I'm the same way, I suppose. And it's just simply based on my experience. The older farmer, who is, let's say 55, 65, whatever age you want to put on it, has a totally different frame of reference, field of experience that they're operating within. So, part of it is about learning, but also part of it is about gaining more experience. And so as time goes on, as these younger farmers have experience buying seed, chemicals, fertilizer, animal nutrition, whatever, they're going to begin to learn more or appreciate more what it is that they're looking for. And then that appreciation for service, really, you don't really appreciate service until you don't have it, until you get bad service. So it may take a little time for that to happen.
Yeah. It's sort of like I didn't realize how much I appreciated face-to-face contact and communication with people until I couldn't do it due to
Isn't that the truth? I haven't
COVID.
left this room in 8 months.
Every time I talk to you, you're in that room in that exact same position. At least my backdrop changes once in a while. You were locked
There's
in.
nowhere else to go. Yeah,
Do you eat in that room too? Like what? Like you're sleeping in there too, aren't you? Like you never leave that room.
I never leave the room. No, I leave the room. I got some wonderful kids downstairs who are hopefully not competing for internet bandwidth right now.
Yeah, so
Maybe they're
true.
even watching.
Yeah, my kids watch once in a while, and then they make fun of me.
I need to
They
get a backdrop. I need a backdrop.
that's a pretty good one. That guitar, that's I like. I got a couple messages from people liking the hat display you have in the background too. So
Yeah,
that's
so
good
the
as well.
pre-COVID, I would travel around, and I have a bucket list of seeing all Major League Baseball stadiums, and these hats are from all the stadiums that we've been to, and that
Yeah.
got put on hold real quick last year. And so, first thing I do when this is over, we're going to hit up a bunch of stadiums.
Blue Jays get Brantley and Springer, and they're still in on Bauer. So, I got another
Yep.
question here from Phil. What differences do you see in farmer between Quebec versus English Canada? That's a good question, Phil.
Yeah, Phil, we didn't really go too in depth in looking at those geographical differences. I think that traditionally we have seen obviously differences in production, size of farm, types of farm, things of that nature. Uh, and I can't say for certain if this is true. We have often looked at the Quebec farmer as being leaders in innovation, particularly in the livestock side. Uh, I'm not sure if that has changed because I don't have precise information to draw that. I'd be interested to hear other people's perspectives on that who do more work in the Quebec marketplace.
About how younger people are making decisions and on what kinds of decisions. Gerard, it's a little bit in the reverse. How do you encourage the younger generation to start taking charge and making decisions?
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
see, the audience likes to throw good ones out there. These are good.
well. I mean, I can only speak from my personal experience here. I was very fortunate to uh, work beginning of my career with my father and my mother, who was involved in the family business as well. And if I would use that experience as a model, because it did work well. One of the things that my dad always did was recognize that the future of the business was going to involve me more than, and therefore I had to make some decisions for which I could fail at or succeed with, but I'd own them at the end of the day. I think sometimes it's a matter of just sort of cutting the string, letting people go. Now, I mean, in my case, the risk was a lot lower than if you're looking at a multi-million-dollar farming operation. Uh, I think a lot of it comes back to family dynamic, which is something is hard to. We have looked at conflict and conflict management in some of our previous studies, and I think that we find that the farms with the least amount of perceived conflict have the least amount of trouble letting go. I experience. I think one of the things that allowed this to succeed was that it wasn't necessarily to take the risk or take charge of certain decisions. I think it was my dad being willing to let go.
Yeah.
And, I think that's what a lot of people have a hard time doing, especially when they built something that they take a lot of pride in, being able to not interfere when the next group takes over can be difficult.
There's like really fine lines here, is there not? Because I think of my dad. I think it's in like I think our both our ability to be introspective here it kind of adds to the conversation. So I think of my dad, his father, my grandfather. My grandfather didn't want anybody to make any decisions. Like he made every decision. Nothing was delegated, and it just really pissed my dad off for his entire life. My dad was the opposite, where he really, really allowed me to make a lot of decisions and provide input, but at and was challenging about it. I think he really went about it the right way. In a sense, he wanted me to face adversity in that decision making, fail a little, have some successes, but I see a lot of times where people set their kids up to fail as if like it's going to be this grand lesson if you completely stack the deck for them to fail. You don't give them the proper information, they don't have proper training, and it's like, hey, sink or swim, and it can have damaging impacts on the business, and then those decisions are just pulled back. See, I told you weren't ready. Well, you're going to have to wait 15 years before you get to make your next one. That is super not the right way to go about it.
That's an interesting perspective. When you look at our multi-generational farm study, uh, we asked questions related to, when are you ready to hand over the reins to somebody else to make a decision, and you know uh, uh, and what decisions are you willing to hand over, and a lot of the answers revolved around, well, what is the interest level of the next generation? They have to show some initiative. You talk about setting people up for success, though. One of the interesting things that we observed is that the younger generation of farmer is significantly more educated than the older generation. And what I mean
Hmm.
by that is they have formal education. They went away to school. And that alone is a meaningful marker, if you will, to look at the education level, because not only does it suggest, well, they went to school, learning in a formal environment, whether it's college or university, but they also got off the farm for a little bit and
Hmm.
experienced living in Guelph or Ridgetown or Olds or wherever it happened to be, U of S. Um, and so what happens when they're there? They learn they meet other people, they gain additional perspective and experience, they bring that back to the farm. In many cases, we find that younger generation has had significant experience working in another sector of the industry, working for ag retail, working for a bank,
Yep.
something like that, before they come back to the farm, so that they're primed and ready to take over. Now, not in all cases, of course, but in more than we had expected. Another thing that we found too is that there's the process is not just done on an annual basis. So this year's your first year, you make a decision this year, next year you'll make another decision, etc. These decisions are usually given some time, like there's like 3 or 4 years in between uh, the next level of purchase decision making that person is handed. And so I think that's gives us that window to test whether or not this is going well or not.
Yeah. Uh, I know our mutual good friend Jolene Brown talks a lot about get the heck off the farm. Um, you need to collect some of your bumps, not around your parents and in the family business. It's a very worthwhile exercise for everybody. There's other ways to run a business than just the way that your parents have or your grandparents did, and you need to be exposed to some of those things. And maybe it's even in a different geography and not just up the
Mhm.
road. Question here from Mary. She says, or Marie, how do farmers use current supply and demand and market analysis tools in making decisions to expand or diversify their operations? So maybe how analytical, how much do some farmers use quantitative tools to make some of these decisions?
I think we're seeing more and more. Uh, you take a look at the amount of, well, the increase in things like software usage, digital record keeping and stuff like that. It's making it possible much more than it was before. I'll tell you something else that we're seeing that is related to this. Um, we are seeing much more reliance or dependence on a group that we call other business service providers. So this is something that we've measured. Huge uptake of in the usefulness of these people, and who do they include? Accountants, lawyers, business management consultants. And so whether the farmer themselves is relying on these analytics to make decisions, they are in many cases working in concert with somebody else who is, and I think uh, that is meaningful to see that increase, and it's something that we should likely be paying attention to.
Yeah, good points. Hey, Justin, this has been a lot of fun. The URL is at the bottom if you are interested in talking to Justin and I about Real AgriStudies. realagriculture.com/real agristudies. Justin, this has been a lot of fun. I really do appreciate it. We got to do this again because there is so many different angles to kind of look at this. I really enjoyed it, and I do appreciate you joining us here today on Real Ag Live.
Yeah, thank you, Shaun.
Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for tuning in. I want to remind you today to check out RealAg Radio. It is on Rural Radio 147 at 4:30 Eastern. We're going to have a lot of fun today. Today's show is sponsored by Decisive Farming, powered by TELUS Agriculture. Great discussion with Blair Rudder about the impact of the carbon tax on the grain transportation system and how some of those added costs are going to flow downhill to farmers. A great interview with Blair. As well, Lindsay Smith talks to Joe Dickinson about the Beef Farmers of Ontario's inclusion policy they just released. So some very important stuff there as well. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Live, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.